I spent years telling everyone who would listen how proud I was of my son. I repaired my house with his money. I paid off family debts with his money. I gave to the temple with his money. And I thanked God every single night for the son I always knew he would become. Then one day, I found out where that money was really coming from. And I understood that everything I had celebrated, every moment of pride, every tear of gratitude, had been built on something I never should have touched. The worst part was not what my son had done. The worst part was realizing that I had spent his entire life protecting him from the consequences of who he was choosing to be, and that my love, the love I was most proud of, may have been the very thing that made all of this possible. This is my story, and I wish I never had to tell it. There are things a mother carries inside her chest that no one ever sees. Not the neighbors, not the relatives who visit during festivals, not even the husband who sleeps beside her for decades. Things she buries deep, beneath the rice she cooks every morning and the prayers she whispers before sleep. Things she hopes, with everything she has, will one day stop hurting. I have been carrying one of those things for years now. My name is Vasundhara. I am 58 years old. I live in a small city in India where everyone knows everyone, where the women talk at the well and the men talk at the tea stall, and nothing stays secret for very long. I raised my son in this city. I watched him take his first steps in this city. I buried my mother and my mother-in-law in this city. I thought I would grow old here with a quiet heart, surrounded by grandchildren who would call me by name and sit at my feet. That is not the life I got. My son, Arjun, was never an easy child. I knew it from the time he was very young, maybe 7 or 8 years old. The way he always tested every boundary I set. The way he looked at rules as if they were suggestions rather than walls. Other children would hear no and stop. Arjun would hear no and find a different door. I told myself this was strength. I told myself this was the mark of someone who would not be defeated by life. I held on to that story for a very long time. By the time he was a teenager, the trouble had started in ways I could no longer explain away to myself. He came home late. He came home with boys I did not recognize, boys whose eyes moved too fast and whose hands were always in their pockets. More than once, a neighbor knocked on our door with a complaint. More than once, something went missing from the street and people looked in our direction without saying anything directly. I would wake in the middle of the night with my heart pounding for no reason I could name, and I would go to his room just to see him sleeping, just to remind myself that he was still my boy, still the same child who used to bring me wildflowers from the field behind our house. His father was harder on him than I was. We argued about it often. My husband believed in consequences. He believed that a boy who was not corrected would become a man who could not be corrected. I believed in patience. I believed that love, given in large enough quantities, could soften even the sharpest edges. Looking back now, I wonder which of us was right. I wonder if either of us was right. I wonder if there is any right answer when the person you are trying to reach has already decided, somewhere deep inside himself, who he wants to be. When Arjun was 22, my husband passed away. It was his heart, sudden, as those things often are. One morning my husband was drinking his tea and reading the newspaper, and by the afternoon he was gone. The grief of that year is something I will not try to describe, because there are no words that would be accurate. I will only say that Arjun in those months was closer to me than he had ever been. He sat with me in the evenings. He brought me food when I forgot to eat. He slept some nights on the floor beside my bed because he knew I was afraid to be alone in the dark. I thought grief had changed him. I thought losing his father had cracked something open in him, the way a drought cracks the earth before the rain finally comes. I thought he was becoming someone new. For a while, it seemed like that was true. He found small work in the city. He came home at reasonable hours. The boys with the fast eyes stopped appearing at our door. My relatives began to say that Arjun had finally grown up, that it was a shame it took tragedy to do it. But at least he had arrived. I allowed myself to feel proud. Then, about a year after his father died, Arjun came to me with news. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten every meal of his childhood, and he told me that a cousin of a friend had connections in America, that there was an opportunity, that he could go, work hard, and build something real, something that his father had never been able to give us. He said he wanted to make a life that would honor his father's name. He said, "Ma, I want to become someone you can be proud of." I remember the way the evening light came through the window when he said those words. I remember thinking that his father would have wanted this for him. I remember the feeling that rose in my chest, something between fear and hope, the way those two feelings are sometimes impossible to separate. I told him yes. I told him to go. I packed his bags myself, folding each shirt the way I had folded his clothes since he was a child, pressing them flat with my hands as if I could press my prayers into the fabric. I cooked his favorite foods for the last dinner we shared before his flight. I did not sleep that night, and I did not cry until after he left, because I did not want the last image he carried of me to be a weeping woman. I wanted him to carry the image of a mother who believed in him. I believed in him with my whole heart. That belief was the most expensive thing I ever gave away. The house, which had always felt too small when he was inside it, suddenly felt enormous. I would walk from the kitchen to the bedroom and feel the emptiness of each room like a presence, like something that had weight and temperature. I cooked smaller portions and still made too much. I washed only my own clothes and kept reaching for shirts that were no longer there. Grief is strange that way. The body remembers what the mind is still trying to accept. He called in those early weeks, but not as often as I had hoped. When he did call, his voice was tired. He said he was adjusting. He said America was not what he had imagined, that everything was more expensive, more complicated, more exhausting than he had been told. He said he was sharing a room with 3 other men in a city whose name I had to ask him to repeat twice before I could write it down. He said the winters were brutal, and the work was hard, and some days he wondered if he had made a mistake. I told him to stay. I told him that all good things required suffering first. I told him that his father had suffered too, had worked in the heat for decades without ever complaining, and that suffering was not a sign that something was wrong. It was a sign that something real was being built. I told him that I was praying for him every single morning, that his name was in every prayer I said, and that God does not abandon the children of mothers who pray. I do not know if those words helped him or not. What I know is that slowly, over the following months, something in his voice began to change. The tiredness faded. A new energy replaced it, something faster, something that moved through his sentences the way electricity moves through a wire. He began to talk less about the difficulty of daily work and more about opportunities. He used words I did not fully understand, words about connections and networks and people he was meeting. He said he had found a smarter way to make money. He said he was tired of working hard for someone else's benefit. I asked him what kind of work he meant. He said, "Ma, don't worry. It's business. Just business." I accepted that answer. I am ashamed to say how easily I accepted it, but I was a woman who had never left my city, who had never owned a bank account in my own name until after my husband died, who understood the world in the language of meals cooked and prayers offered and children raised. Business was a word that belonged to a world I had never fully entered, and my son was in America, which I imagined as a place where business happened in glass buildings and people wore clean clothes and became successful through effort and intelligence. I told myself he had simply found his intelligence. Then the money started coming. The first transfer arrived on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I was at the market when my phone showed the notification, and I had to step to the side of the road because my hands were shaking. The amount was more than my husband had earned in 2 months of his best working years. I stood there on that dusty street and I cried, right there in front of the vegetable sellers and the auto rickshaws, and I did not care who saw me. I called Arjun immediately. He laughed at the sound of my crying. He said, "Ma, this is just the beginning." And it was. The money continued to arrive, month after month, each transfer larger than the last. With it, I began to repair things I had learned to live with broken. The roof, which had leaked in 3 places during every monsoon for 11 years. The floor of the back room, which had cracked so badly that I had covered it with old saris to hide the damage. The front gate, which had rusted shut and which I had been entering through the side for so long that I had stopped noticing. I fixed all of it. Then I did more. I paid off a debt my husband had left behind, a loan from a relative that had sat between our families like a stone for 5 years. I helped my sister when her youngest son fell ill and the hospital bills became too much. I gave a small amount to the temple where I had prayed every week since I was a girl. Each time I did one of these things, I felt something I can only describe as vindication. All the years I had defended Arjun to his father, to my relatives, to the neighbors who had spoken badly of him, all of those years felt justified. I had been right. I had seen something in him that others had refused to see. A mother's faith is not blindness, I told myself. It is vision. It is the ability to see the person someone is becoming rather than the person they have been. I told this to anyone who would listen. When relatives came to visit and admired the repaired house, I told them about Arjun. When women at the temple asked about my son, I spoke of him with a pride I had never allowed myself before. When the neighbor who had once come to our door with complaints about him passed me on the street, I made sure she saw the new gate, the new paint on the walls, the small signs of a prosperity that I wore like an answer to every doubt anyone had ever expressed about my son. I was happy in a way I had not been since before my husband died. I was also, though I did not know it yet, living inside a story that was not true. There were small moments, looking back now, when something tried to reach me. A hesitation in Arjun's voice when I asked too many questions about his work. A vagueness in his answers that I translated as modesty rather than concealment. Once, I asked him to explain exactly what he did, and he gave me an answer so general, so empty of any real detail, that it could have described almost anything. I thanked him for explaining. I understand now that I did not want to know. There is a kind of not knowing that is passive, that happens to you because no one tells you the truth. And there is a kind of not knowing that you choose, that you maintain carefully, like a garden you tend precisely because you are afraid of what grows when you stop tending it. Mine was the second kind. I chose, every single day, to believe the version of my son that made sense to me, the version where suffering had transformed him, the version where America had given him the distance he needed from his old self. The version where a mother's faith had finally, after so many painful years, been proven right. I watered that version every morning with my prayers. I did not let myself look at anything that might kill it. I had seen it before, in my life. I had seen it at my husband's bedside in the hospital, when the doctors looked at each other before looking at me. I had seen it at family gatherings when two relatives who had argued would go quiet the moment I entered. I knew what that silence felt like. I knew its shape and its weight. I began to feel it whenever Arjun's name came up. It started small, the way most things that will eventually destroy you start small. A cousin of mine who had a son living in the same city as Arjun came to visit me one afternoon. We sat together in the front room, drinking tea, and I did what I always did in those days. I spoke about Arjun. I told her how well he was doing, how the money he sent had allowed me to fix the house, how proud I was, how I felt that my husband, wherever he was, could finally rest easy knowing his son had found his path. My cousin listened. She did not smile the way people smile when they are genuinely happy for you. She smiled the way people smile when they are trying to decide how much of the truth to give you. She asked a few careful questions. She drank her tea slowly, and when she left, she held my hand at the door for a moment longer than usual. The way you hold someone's hand when you know something difficult is coming toward them, and you cannot decide whether to warn them or protect them by staying silent. I noticed all of this. I told myself I was imagining it. A few weeks later, two men from our city who had been living in America for several years came back to visit their families. They were known in our community, respectable men, men whose opinions carried weight. Someone organized a small gathering at a neighbor's house, the kind of informal evening where people sit on chairs arranged in a circle and drink chai and talk about life in America for the benefit of those who have family there. I went because I thought I might hear something that would help me understand Arjun's world better. I sat near the back. When it was my turn to speak, I mentioned Arjun by name. I said he was doing very well in the same city where one of these men had been living. I said he was involved in business and that things were going excellently. The man I mentioned looked at me. I will never forget that look for as long as I live. It lasted less than 2 seconds. It was not cruel. It was not contemptuous. It was something far worse than either of those things. It was the look of a person who feels sorry for you and is trying with everything they have to keep that sorrow from showing on their face. He said, "That is good to hear." And then he moved the conversation in a different direction so smoothly, so quickly, that if I had not been watching him closely, I might not have noticed the turn at all. I went home that night, and I did not sleep. For the first time since Arjun had left, I allowed myself to ask the question I had been refusing to ask. Not out loud, not even in a full sentence inside my own mind. Just a small crack, just enough for the question to breathe. Something is wrong. Something is not what he says it is. I prayed harder than usual that night. I am not sure what I was praying for. Perhaps I was praying that I was wrong. Perhaps I was praying that if something was wrong, God would handle it without requiring me to know about it. There is a prayer that mothers pray that they never say out loud, a prayer that goes, "Please let my child be good. And if he is not good, please let me not find out until it is over." I prayed that prayer. It was not answered the way I hoped. 3 weeks after that gathering, a letter arrived. Not from Arjun. From Arjun's cousin on his father's side, a young man named Deepak who had emigrated several years earlier and whom Arjun had contacted after arriving in America. Deepak and Arjun had never been particularly close as children, but they were family. And family in a foreign country becomes a different kind of thing than family at home. In a foreign country, family is whoever speaks your language and remembers your grandmother's name. The letter was short. Deepak wrote that he had been trying to reach me by phone but had not been able to connect. He wrote that he had something important to tell me and that he preferred to write it rather than say it because he wanted me to have time to sit with it before I responded. He wrote that he was sorry, that this was not a letter he had wanted to write, that he had gone back and forth for weeks about whether it was his place to say anything at all. And then he told me. He had gone to visit Arjun, he wrote, not at his home. He had gone, without understanding at first what he was going to find, to a place where Arjun had been taken some weeks earlier. A detention facility, a place with guards and locked doors and visiting hours that you had to schedule in advance and pass through security to attend. My son was not in an office somewhere in America doing business. My son was behind bars. I read that letter 4 times. I read it the way you read something when your brain refuses on the first pass to accept the meaning of the words, when it sends you back to the beginning, hoping that something will be different the second time, the third time, the fourth time. Each time I finished, the words were the same. Each time, the meaning was the same. I put the letter down on the kitchen table and I sat very still for a long time. I did not cry immediately. The crying came later, and when it came, it was the kind that does not make sound, the kind that takes over your whole body and leaves you feeling afterward like something has been wrung out of you that you will not get back. But in those first minutes, I simply sat. I sat in the kitchen where I had cooked his meals for 22 years. I sat beside the window that faced the front gate I had repaired with his money. I sat in the house that his money had fixed, and I looked at everything his money had touched, and I felt something that I did not have a name for yet. It was not anger. It was not grief. It was something older and heavier than both. It was the feeling of a woman who realizes that the story she has been living inside was never real. That the walls she thought were solid are made of something that dissolves the moment you press your hand against them. That every act of pride and gratitude and vindication she has performed for the past months has been built on a foundation she was never allowed to see. I thought of every person I had spoken to about my son. I thought of every moment of pride I had displayed. I thought of the neighbor and her new view of my gate. And I understood, sitting in that kitchen with Deepak's letter on the table in front of me, that the shame I was about to carry was going to be heavier than anything I had carried before. Not because of what other people would say, but because of what I now knew about myself, about the questions I had refused to ask, about the answers I had refused to hear, about the faith I had called love, when perhaps it had always been, at least in part, a way of protecting myself from the truth. I kept Deepak's letter in the drawer beside my bed, folded exactly as it had arrived, and every morning I would open the drawer and look at it without touching it, the way you look at something that has the power to hurt you, just to confirm it is still there, just to remind yourself that what happened was real and not something your mind invented in the night. During those 11 days, I continued my routine. I woke at the same hour. I made my tea. I went to the temple on the mornings I always went to the temple. I cooked my meals and swept my floor and answered when neighbors called out to me from across the street. From the outside, I was exactly the same woman I had been the week before. From the inside, I was someone I did not recognize, moving through the motions of a life that no longer felt like it belonged to me. Arjun did not call during those days. He had not called in several weeks before the letter arrived either, and I had told myself he was busy, that business demanded his full attention, that successful men did not always have time to call their mothers. Now I understood the real reason for his silence. He was in a place where calls were monitored and limited and required a kind of courage I suppose he had not yet found. The courage to speak to his mother from behind the walls of a detention facility and hear what her voice would do when she realized where he was calling from. On the 12th day, Deepak called. He asked if I had received his letter. I said yes. He asked if I was all right. I said I did not know. There was a long silence between us. The kind of silence that happens between two people who both understand that whatever is said next will be the beginning of something that cannot be undone. He told me more. He told me that Arjun had been involved in a scheme, that he had been part of a group that had been taking money from people, many of them Indian immigrants themselves, people who had come to America with very little and had trusted the wrong individuals with what they had. He told me that the authorities had been watching for some time before they moved. He told me that Arjun was not the only one arrested, but that the evidence against him was significant. He told me that the money Arjun had been sending home was part of what was being investigated. When he said that, something happened in my chest that I cannot properly describe. It was as if every warm memory I had attached to that money, every repaired wall, every paid debt, every moment of pride I had felt when I helped my sister or gave to the temple was suddenly pulled out from under me all at once, the way a cloth is pulled from a table and everything on top of it crashes to the floor. I had not earned that money through suffering. I had not received it as the reward of a son's honest labor. I had received it as the byproduct of something that had harmed other people, people like me, people who had trusted and been deceived, people who had come to a foreign country with hope, and had that hope taken from them by someone who understood exactly how to exploit it because he had grown up watching what hope looked like in people who did not have very much of it. I thought about the immigrants Deepak described. I thought about what it means to leave everything you know and travel to a country where you do not speak the language naturally, where the food is unfamiliar, where you have no family nearby, where every day requires a courage that people who have never done it cannot fully understand. I thought about those people saving their money, working long hours in jobs that did not match their education or their dignity, sending money home to their own mothers, their own children, carrying the weight of two worlds on their shoulders. And I thought about my son looking at those people and seeing an opportunity. That thought broke something in me that has not fully healed since. I called Arjun 2 days after speaking with Deepak. It took several attempts to reach him. When I finally heard his voice, it was smaller than I remembered, stripped of the energy and confidence that had been filling his words for the past months. He said my name the way a child says it when they know they are in trouble, quietly, with a kind of desperate hope that the person on the other end will somehow still choose softness over truth. I did not have softness left. I asked him directly if what Deepak had told me was true. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said yes. He said he was sorry. He said he had planned to tell me himself, but had not known how. He said things had started small and grown beyond what he had anticipated. He said the people he was involved with had made it very difficult to leave once he was inside. He said many things. I listened to all of them. And I want to be honest here, because this is the part of the story that I find most difficult to tell, more difficult even than learning the truth itself. When I heard his voice, when I heard him say he was sorry in that small, frightened way, part of me wanted to forgive him immediately. Part of me wanted to say that it was all right, that we would find a way through, that I was his mother, and mothers do not abandon their children in the dark. That part of me is still there. It has never gone away. But there was another part of me, newer and more painful, that understood something I had been refusing to understand for his entire life. Loving someone completely and making excuses for them are not the same thing. Believing in someone and refusing to see them clearly are not the same thing. A mother's faith is not infinite permission. It is not a shield that protects a person from the consequences of who they choose to be. I had given Arjun that shield his entire life. Every time his father had tried to hold him accountable, I had softened the blow. Every time a consequence had come for him, I had found a way to reduce it, to protect him from the full weight of it, telling myself that I was saving him when perhaps I was only delaying the moment when he would have to face himself honestly. Perhaps, if I had let him face himself sooner, he would have had the chance to choose differently. I do not know. I will never know. That uncertainty is one of the things I carry now, alongside everything else. I told Arjun on that call that I loved him. That has never changed, and it will not change. But I also told him something I had never said to him before in his entire life. I told him that I would not be coming to rescue him this time. I told him that what happened next would have to come from him, from whatever he was willing to do to face what he had done honestly and make it right. He was quiet for a long time after I said that. Then he said, "I know, Ma." Those 2 words, small as they were, felt like the first honest thing he had said to me in longer than I could measure. Not a promise, not an excuse, not a plan, just an acknowledgement, simple and unadorned, that he understood. I held those 2 words for a long time after we stopped talking. I am still holding them. I know that is not what people want to hear. We are told, from the time we are young, that time is the great medicine, that if you wait long enough the sharpest pain will dull, that mornings eventually stop feeling like weights you have to lift before you can begin the day. I believed that for most of my life. I repeated it to others going through difficulty. I repeated it to myself during the year my husband died. I believe it less now. Some things do not heal with time. They only become more familiar. You learn to carry them differently, to distribute the weight across more of yourself so that no single part of you collapses under it. But the weight remains. It is there when you wake. It is there when you sit down to eat alone. It is there in the temple, in the middle of a prayer, when your mind slips away from the words and lands somewhere you did not intend to go. The weeks after my call with Arjun were the longest of my life. I had to do the thing I had been dreading since the moment I read Deepak's letter. I had to tell people, not everyone, not all at once, but the ones who were close enough that the silence itself would eventually become a kind of lie. My sister, 2 cousins, the relative whose debt I had repaid with Arjun's money, a conversation that filled me with a specific shame I still do not have adequate words for. Each conversation was its own particular pain. My sister cried with me, which helped. One cousin was kind and said very little, which also helped. The relative whose debt I had paid was quiet in a way that I understood to mean they were processing something complicated, something that mixed gratitude and discomfort in proportions they had not yet sorted out. I did not blame any of them for their reactions. I was having trouble sorting out my own. The neighbor with the view of my new gate never said anything to me directly, but I saw the way the street changed around me in those weeks, the way certain conversations stopped when I approached, the way some eyes held mine a moment too long or not long enough. In a small city, news travels in ways that do not require anyone to speak it out loud. It moves through expressions and silences and the particular way people arrange themselves when you enter a room. I had lived in this city my entire life. I knew how to read it. I read it clearly. What surprised me was that the external judgment, as painful as it was, turned out not to be the hardest part. I had expected the hardest part to be the shame of facing my community with the truth about my son. And that was hard. But it was not the thing that kept me awake at night in the deepest hours, not the thing that sat heaviest in my chest during the quiet afternoons when there was nothing to do but think. The hardest part was the conversation I had to have with myself, about who I had been as a mother, not about the obvious failures, the moments when I had defended him when perhaps I should not have, the years of softening consequences that were meant to teach him something. Those were real, and I examined them honestly, and they caused me genuine pain. But beneath those specific failures was something larger and more difficult to look at directly. I had loved Arjun in a way that was partly about him and partly about me, part of my belief in him. That fierce insistence that he was good, that he would change, that the next opportunity would be the one that finally revealed the man I knew was inside him, part of that belief was not really about Arjun at all. It was about what it would mean for me if I was wrong. It was about the identity I had built around being the mother who saw what others could not see, who had the faith that others lacked, who would one day be proven right in a way that would make every difficult year worth enduring. My faith in my son had become, somewhere along the way, a story I was telling about myself. And when the truth arrived, it did not only take away my image of Arjun, it took away that version of myself too. The woman who had special vision, the mother whose love was powerful enough to change someone, the person who had been right all along while everyone else was wrong. That woman did not exist. She had never existed. What existed was a mother who loved her child so much that she had confused love with permission, faith with blindness, hope with the refusal to see what was directly in front of her. These are not the same things. I know that now, in a way that I cannot unknow. The knowing is permanent. It has changed the way I see everything. Not only the past, but the present. Not only my son, but myself. Arjun is still navigating the consequences of what he did. I will not describe the details because they belong to a process that is still unfolding, and because some things a mother holds privately, even when she is being as honest as she knows how to be. What I will say is that we still speak. Not often, not easily, but we speak. And the conversations we have now are different from any conversations we had before. Stripped of the performance we had both been maintaining without fully realizing it. Him performing success and freedom from his past. Me performing certainty and pride. What remains after the performance ends is something rawer and smaller, and I think more real. I have stopped praying for Arjun to become the man I imagined. I pray now for something simpler and harder. I pray that he finds his way to honesty, not for my sake, not for anyone else's opinion, but for his own. I pray that somewhere inside the consequences he is living through, there is a moment where he meets himself clearly, without excuses, without the story he has been telling about who he is, and that in that meeting he finds something worth building from. I pray that he becomes someone he can respect. That is all. That is the whole prayer now. As for me, I live in the same house I have always lived in. The repairs are still there, the roof no longer leaks, the gate opens and closes properly. I look at these things sometimes, and I feel something complicated that I do not try to simplify. The money that paid for them cannot be unmade. The walls do not know where the money came from. The roof keeps the rain out regardless. I am still here, in this city where everyone knows everyone. I am still the woman whose son is in America. But I am also, finally, a woman who has stopped telling herself a story that is not true. And I have learned at 58 years old that there is a kind of freedom in that, painful and unwanted, and arrived at through loss, but real. The truth, even when it is terrible, is still something you can stand on. That is more than I can say for the story I was living before. I do not know what comes next for my son or for me. I have stopped believing that I can know such things in advance, that a mother's certainty can determine the shape of what is coming. I hold the future more loosely now. I hold most things more loosely now. What I hold tightly, the only thing I will not release, is this. He is still my son. Whatever he has done, whatever he has yet to do or undo, whatever the years ahead bring for both of us, he is still the boy who brought me wildflowers from the field behind our house when he was small, who slept on the floor beside my bed in the worst year of my life, who said I know, Ma, in a voice stripped of everything except the truth. I am still his mother. That has not changed. I do not think it ever will.